Morning. South African law professor Tladi and 5 others will be sworn in as ICJ judges at The Hague this morning. The new members of the court, elected by the General Assembly and the Security Council of the United Nations, that was on the 9th of November last year, will begin their 9-year terms today. Tladi's swearing in comes in the middle of the ICJ ruling in favor of South Africa in the country's genocidal intent case against Israel. Now, late last year, we spoke to, in fact, my co-anchor Ayanda Nyati spoke to Professor Tladi and asked him about the significance of South Africa clinching a seat on the ICJ Judges bench. This is what he had to say.
The one thing is I'm driven by the concept of solidarity in international law, which is basically the idea that the international legal system is concerned about those that are most marginalized. Now, it's not, of course, it's not for the court to create that legal system, nor is it for the court to create the rules, but I think the court can, through its judgments, foster an atmosphere in which that kind of international law is sort of gradually created. I mean, that's the contribution that I hope to make to the court. I mean, amongst others, of course. Yes. I think what's most important is for the court, the individuals on the court, to be objective. But I think always with this idea of what is it that our international law can create.
Well, Professor Tladi also elaborated on how he hoped to use his influence at the court if indeed he was to be elected.
One thing is I'm driven by the concept of solidarity in international law, which is basically the idea that the international legal system is concerned about those that are most marginalized. Now, it's not, of course, it's not for the court to create that legal system, nor is it for the court to create the rules, but I think the court can, through its judgments, foster an atmosphere in which that kind of international law is sort of gradually created. I mean, that's the contribution that I hope to make to the court. I mean, amongst others, of course. Yes. I think what's most important is for the court, the individuals on the court, to be objective, but I think always with this idea of what is it that our international law can create.
All right, let's get you some analysis on the story this morning and bring in Bea Benjamin, who is a research and advocacy officer at Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And this is such an incredibly good news story and such a proud moment for our country, isn't it?
Yes, Michelle, good morning, and good morning to your viewers. Yes, this is an absolute proud moment for South Africa. This is one of those big events in the global stage where South Africans are showing off. Judge Tladi will be the first judge to come from South Africa to sit in the International Court of Justice. And of course, he has been a player in the international arena. He's regarded as a global expert on international law. And up until now, he actually has been the special rapporteur for the International Law Commission, which sets the rules of international law. And his project has really been trying to make many of the rules to be binding on the state as legal principles. So he has a good track record, and it is an absolute fantastic achievement for South Africa.
Yeah, a good track record to say the least, right? And let's not forget, Mbekezeli, that there were elections. He had to make a case for why he would be the best candidate for this position, and he obviously did so very well.
Yes, absolutely. So the election process is actually very rigorous. You firstly need to convince the members of the United Nations General Assembly. That is about 190 countries. You need all of them to vote for you. But secondly, you also need to persuade members of the Security Council, which is currently about 10 states. And so that election process really needed for the Department of International Relations, for Professor Tladi himself to work hard to make a case for himself on the global stage. And he was successful. His election was actually with the consent and the support of most of the global community.
And have we made an attempt, have we stood for these elections a representative from our country before?
No, not for the International Court of Justice, but South African lawyers and South African judges have always had a sort of punched above their weight when it comes to international forums. For example, currently we have Western Cape High Court Judge Kate Savage. She sits on the United Nations Appeal Tribunal. We have Judge John Murphy, who also sat in one of that tribunal. Of course, there's Judge Navi Pillay, who was the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner. So we do have a number of South African lawyers and judges making a global impact. But I can fairly say that Professor Tladi has made the biggest in terms of being on the world court at the International Court of Justice. Yeah,
absolutely. But your point is well made. The fact that we do have a reputation already in terms of the international legal platform. Let's not also forget, Mbekezeli, that we saw some of our top legal minds at the International Court of Justice making South Africa's case for genocidal intent by Israel against Palestine. And that in itself, it was incredible to watch these legal minds forming the most incredible arguments. We here at home, we were astounded. I believe, many countries perhaps won't admit by just how incredibly impressed that they were with the South African legal team at the ICJ at the time. I mean, what does this now also say? If we take all of these things that you've mentioned, the judges that already are on the global stage legally, this appointment by Professor Tladi, and of course our lawyers at The Hague making that case at the ICJ, what does this say, all of these things together, about South Africa's standing on the global stage?
Well, it says two things. Number one, it says that South Africa produces top quality lawyers and judges who are able to stand their own on the global stage. The second point is that many of the South African lawyers and judges have really made the global impact on issues like human rights. We have developed a track record as being at the forefront of international human rights law, and which is why even now, Prof. Tladi in that insert, he was saying that his belief in human rights law is on global solidarity and helping the most vulnerable. The same approach was taken by Judge Navi Pillay as the Human Rights Commissioner, and so we have developed that track record as defenders of human rights on the global stage. And that, I think, is good for our country in terms of its standing on the global stage. And of course, the mark of excellence that comes with being a South African lawyer doing international law.
Yeah. You talk about him being a global expert on international law, and that clip that we played in the build-up to our interview with you, he talks about, his hopes for the international legal system. And as you say, he says his hope is that the international legal system will be more concerned by the issues affecting those marginalized. Of course, he also goes on to clarify that these laws cannot be created by the international legal system, but certainly they can be fostered. And how do you reckon that can happen, Mbekezeli, that fostering?
Well, there are a couple of ways, one of which has to involve the government, the South African government, making sure that it respects the international treaties, that it obeys the international treaties and upholds them in the global stage. The second of which is actually Professor Tladi's legacy at the International Law Commission, where for the last decade or so he's tried to carve out a niche in terms of developing what are called the Jus Cogens norms, which are really the highest level of international norms and legal principles at the global stage. And he's built a strong legacy there, and there's a lot of rich work that can be taken up by international judges and international lawyers, and that is his work. Of course, the third component is his time at the International Court of Justice. He's quite right to say that the ICJ doesn't create the law, but it interprets the law. And one does hope that having a progressive lawyer like Professor Tladi on that stage, he can take a more progressive stance on some of the international legal principles to the benefit of the most vulnerable and marginalized in the world. And so those are the three components where I see he can have, or South Africa as a country can have an impact on the international law and its development across the world.
I mean, of course, everything that you're saying sort of rings of a whole range of stories, but I suppose the one that comes to mind is Israel's war against Palestine following that surprise attack by Hamas on Israel on October 7th last year. Do you reckon it is a foregone conclusion that Professor Tladi will sit on that genocide case against Israel?
Yes, I think he's likely to sit in the case because right now the judgment that has already been given was only on the provisional measure stage. The case will still continue. The court is expecting a report from the State of Israel in the next couple of weeks, and then the case will continue for the next couple of years. The International Court of Justice currently has lost about 4 members of the court, including the president, Judge Donoghue. And so Judge Tladi and 3 others will be replacing those members. And that means they will have to carry on the work of the genocide case brought by South Africa against the State of Israel. So that work will continue, and he is likely to sit in the case. But of course, I must emphasize here that the judges of the International Court of Justice do not represent their countries. Mm-hmm. Yes, they were elected and nominated by their countries, but they were ultimately elected for the world. And so when they sit there, they must bring objectivity. They must bring their own interpretation of the law outside of what their country or the politicians in their country have said. So that is an important distinction, and that's what we expect Judge Tladi to do when he takes his seat at the International Court of Justice.
Yeah, and I don't think that's in question. The sit-down interview that Ayanda Nyati had with Professor Tladi, he emphasized that. He emphasized the importance of objectivity, right? And I suppose there's only one place all of us will be at. Is it 10 o'clock this morning in the Netherlands, or is it 9? Does that translate to 9 o'clock this morning here in South Africa?
No, it is 10 o'clock in the Netherlands and 11 o'clock in South Africa. So in the next couple of hours.
Yeah, we'll be glued to our screens. Mbekezeli Benjamin, let me thank you for your time this morning. Incredibly important story. Professor Bea Tladi, 5 others to be officially sworn in as ICJ judges at The Hague, as you've just heard, at 11 o'clock this morning. And of course, you can catch it all live right here on 405. Another proud moment to be a South African.